Hello, everyone. My name is Justin. I will be one of the hosts here for today's webinar. Thank you again for joining. For those of you that are not already aware, Criterion Edge is dedicated to helping IVD, medical device, and pharmaceutical companies advance compliance and enhance market success through industry-leading regulatory, scientific, and clinical writing services. Our webinar today is part of our Ask the Expert series, Leveraging AI in Regulatory Writing, Opportunities, Oversight, and What Medical Device Leaders Need to Know, presented by Dr. Sarai Paula. Dr. Sarai Paula is an accomplished regulatory and medical writer with over 15 years of experience supporting medical device, pharmaceutical, and biologic companies worldwide. As principal medical writer at Criterion Edge, she develops high-quality, compliant clinical and regulatory documents across a broad range of therapeutic areas. A trained medical doctor with multilingual fluency, Dr. Paula brings deep clinical insight and strong communication skills to every project. Her expertise helps clients navigate complex regulatory requirements with clarity, precision, and confidence. I'm now going to hand it off to Dr. Paula to proceed with today's webinar.
Thanks so much for the introduction, Justin, and welcome to everyone joining us today. We know that artificial intelligence and large language models are transforming the way that medical device and pharmaceutical companies approach the task of regulatory writing. But we still have many questions about how to implement these tools effectively and responsibly, and whether or not they actually save us time or improve productivity. So during today's webinar, some of our learning objectives will be understanding how AI is being used to accelerate regulatory writing workflows, including some of the more specific documents like CERs, PERs, and PMAs. Exploring how we can use AI to work more efficiently and accurately when creating systematic literature reviews and clinical data summaries. Also, to learn what global regulatory agencies and competent authorities are expecting when we use AI to work on our documents, identifying some of the common risks and compliance issues that may be associated with the use of AI, and lastly, gaining a framework for evaluating vendors and service providers who are using AI to support regulatory writing. So we've gathered a few questions from various sources that we'd like to share with you today in a question and answer format. So I think it'll be a great time to dive into the questions.
All righty, with that, let's get started. So the first question, are regulatory agencies like the FDA and notified bodies accepting AI-assisted or AI-generated content in submissions?
This is an interesting question because obviously there are no limitations placed on how content is created at present. But the deciding factor when submitting this type of data to notified bodies or competent authorities is whether or not the data is actually correct and robust, supporting device or medicinal product certification. So we know that the current technology is very heavily based on something called transformer architecture. We usually refer to this as large language models, so LLMs or generative AI. And the problem with this generation process is that it's not flawless. So if we think about the process of document review, the notified bodies will charge per hour to review technical documentation. So if you have any errors in your documents, it'll cost you more and your device will be less likely to be certified. The reason why we have these errors is because this type of architecture is prone to what is known or what are known as hallucinations. It basically, I mean, we've seen examples of this in the media where these LLMs have sort of made up information. This is an inherent flaw of the way that they're designed and the way that they're programmed to work. So the most important factor is that customers need to think about the fact that when they submit, when submitting data to these regulatory authorities, it's not so much about whether or not the AI content or the content was generated using AI. It's more about how much effort was spent reviewing and checking the data to avoid something known as automation bias, which is how our brains are tricked into believing that text is correct when it's written very fluently. That's a key challenge that we will need to work on going forward. But that doesn't mean that you can't use AI generated content.
Excellent. Moving right along. What are the risks of relying too heavily on AI generated content in regulated submissions? And how can they be mitigated?
This is also an interesting question because we've just discussed how relying on AI when submitting technical documentation or other documentation to notified bodies and competent authorities can become very expensive. And these costs shouldn't be underestimated. I'm sure many of the members of the audience will know that at least in some, well, in most parts of the world, the costs can run into several hundred of euro or dollars, US dollars per hour. So aside from the fact that the manufacturer will have to pay exorbitant amounts of money, the device or drug in the as the case may not be certified and may not reach the market. So those costs will never be recouped. And ultimately, at the end of this pathway, we have patients who are going to be deprived of the drugs and medical devices that they need. So at Criterion Edge, what we have done is we've developed numerous quality assurance processes and we practice a lot of continuous improvement. So we take a systematic approach to assessing the data that is, well, the data that clients or customers want to use. And we make heavy use of the four eyes principle, making sure that it's seen by two different people, two or more. It can also be more. I mean, this approach allows us to always treat items of text as something that is completely new with the highest level of scrutiny, irrespective of where the data comes from, because our goal is to help manufacturers maximize their chances of device and drug certification. So specifically in terms of the risks, I think obviously the financial risk is something that cannot be ignored. Companies would not survive if they were forced to rely solely or heavily on AI generated content. But we always need to think of the people at the end of the pathway, namely the patients who won't get the drugs and medical devices that they need.
Excellent. What documentation or validation is needed when AI is used to assist in regulatory writing workflows?
So this question was a little bit tougher to answer because we don't actually have any guidance or any strict guidance in terms of the international standards. There are certain geographies that have released legislation, but there's no step-by-step way to ensure or to guide your validation process. Some of the higher level agencies like the IEC, like the International IEC, have developed some guidelines on how companies should manage AI, and that goes through the process of generating the data that you'll use to train the model, how to design the model, how to approach the model design in comparison to normal software development, and so on. But these aren't really standards, these are more very high level guidelines. So the second thing I want to say in this regard is it's also important to remember that when, at present at least, the majority of companies that use AI will not be using an AI model that they developed in-house. They will be using somebody else's model. The computers and the servers will be sitting in somebody else's building. So there are certain limitations on the type of documentation and validation that one can actually do. And from a Criterion Edge perspective, our recommendation is honestly the best thing that you can do is to store a log of everything. So if you're using generative AI, for example, store a log of the prompts that you use, the response times to the output obtained, and what kind of data that was retrieved. Ideally, you can use that data at a later stage to perform analysis internally and improve the efficiency of your own workflows. But obviously, what I'm saying does require a high level of understanding of data management and model development, risk assessment, cybersecurity, and then, of course, the ability to stay up to date with the regulatory developments in this field. So, what documentation or validation is needed? That's a very difficult question to answer at present. As the laws and regulations continue to develop, we'll be able to give better answers. At the moment, at Criterion Edge, we stay on top of the developments in this field. But the assisting in regulatory writing workflows, the recommendation from our side is at the moment, store whatever you can, keep all the data that you possibly can, and store it securely for when these changes arise, or when the legislative changes arise. Oh.
Wonderful. On to the next. How can companies ensure that AI tools used in regulatory writing meet good documentation practices or GDP?
So this was also quite a quite an interesting question because GDP is basically something that you you comply with by developing systematic business processes to support your activities. There is no GDP without having your business processes analyzed, continuously improved, having the controls that are required to allow documentation to flow seamlessly through an organization and serve the functions that it needs to serve. So, in theory, AI tools shouldn't have much of an impact on GDP because the GDP should be achieved through business activities. In reality, the danger is that these business processes haven't been developed and documentation is more of an on the fly activity. There aren't workflows set up in place. I don't think this would be something that our audience would have a problem with. I think that they're probably quite sophisticated users and individuals. But there are companies and individuals who don't have these processes in place, and that's where the use of AI would have the most impact. So, at least internally at Criterion Edge, we've designed our business processes to be independent of the technology that's being used to generate and manage the documents because we need to have the flexibility to incorporate these emerging technologies. That's our strong point, is our ability to respond dynamically to changes both in the industry and that meet our clients' needs. On the other hand, we also regularly engage in very collaborative meetings to allow, multi-directional feedback and propose improvements. So I think that the most important point when looking at whether or not AI tools are used and how that impacts good documentation practices, I believe the biggest concern will be whether or not the company has structured their own business processes to support GDP, and if so, there shouldn't be any issue.
Excellent. And just a friendly reminder to all the audience members tuning in, you can submit additional questions if you would like using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. We are not likely going to get to additional questions during this presentation, but we would love to follow up after today's webinar with some answers if we can. So feel free to add any of those down there if you need, and also reach out if you have any questions on how to do so. With that, let's go ahead and proceed to the next question. What questions should we ask when evaluating the service provider that incorporates AI into its regulatory writing processes?
I think the very first question that we need to ask whenever working with AI is always who has access to my data? Um, we are moving into a period of time in human society where data is going to be more valuable than what we currently know as subterranean minerals until we start mining asteroids, right? But it's going to be more valuable than minerals. Data is the absolute lifeblood of every company, and it may not seem like that at present because data tends to be very dynamic and can be construed as, and data management can be construed as very chaotic. Um, but it is critical to know and understand who has access to your data, who has control of your data, um, and to what extent they have control and access to your data, and obviously for what purpose. The thing with LLMs, when you expose corporate data, so manufacturer data, pharmaceutical and medical device manufacturer data, to these large language models, the risks of doing that may only become apparent at a much later stage. So, for example, some of the hallucinations are a result of probability calculations in the models. And that probability calculation does have a chance of spewing out exactly the material that a specific manufacturer published or wants to publish or has used in their technical documentation. That's obviously never a good thing because corporate secrets and all that kind of thing. But the companies that are currently offering large language models do say that they mitigate against that in their design, that there's never 100% certainty that it's mitigated. And again, many years into the future, something may happen, putting the internal corporate secrets at risk. So we at Criterion Edge, our approach to this has been to make sure that we are keeping up to date with the emerging technology. Obviously, artificial intelligence is a rapidly evolving field. It's incredibly difficult to stay on top of all of the new developments. But we're not only looking at it from the perspective of improving productivity and getting work done faster. We also look at it from the perspective of maintaining long-term client relationships. Like we need the tools to serve our goals of producing high quality for our clients over time and repeatably and reliably. But I do, to highlight the what I said at the beginning, when asking service providers the deep and important questions, the first question should be, who has access to my data and why and to what extent?
Excellent. How is AI currently being used to speed up the creation of core regulatory documents like CERs, PERs, and PMAs?
So this question focuses on specifically the creation aspect. And I think that's interesting because generative AI is extremely good at creating pieces of text. So in a lot of cases, I think that the generative AI is used to generate or to write prompts to generate sections or parts of documents. Unfortunately, these documents are extremely complex, and the demands placed on the documents by the regulatory agencies and competent authorities are very high. So generating entire documents is currently infeasible. It's the risk of generating inappropriate data is just too high. But sections of documents, that does seem like something that people are very excited about being able to do and are reporting that that can speed up the creation. Obviously, it is supported by LLMs and AI that has to refer to it colloquially as a memory function, where you can train the model to understand your particular needs and writing style. That makes a big difference. But from a Criterion Edge perspective, I mean, we do believe that the most important aspect, as we discussed in the previous question, the most important aspect is to actually focus on maintaining internal data sovereignty. So maintaining control of the internal corporate data. And what this may look like is allowing, rather than allowing models access to all of your documents, allowing them access to specific items of data that you allow access to, and using the AI to sort of fill in the gaps, rather than expecting it to generate everything from scratch. As we know, with a lot of these documents, the hard work is not actually creating the document itself. It's obtaining approvals, getting buy-in, representing the perspectives of multiple groups, activities that have nothing to do with AI. So the part that, I mean, when we're talking about how AI is being used to speed up the creation of regulatory documents, it's currently being used to speed up the generation of items of text. But the most effective way to use it would be to decide what data to allow the AI access to and allow it to fill in the gaps for you, which it can probably do quite well as long as you maintain control of your own data. Yeah.
Wonderful. I believe we have just a couple left. Can AI reduce the time and cost of conducting systematic literature reviews for clinical and regulatory submissions?
So this is a conditional yes. It's a conditional yes because if it's used by the right people, then absolutely. If you have the underlying knowledge of how these models work, and understand their limitations, for example, hallucinations, so generating data that is inappropriate or incorrect, understanding that will help to speed up the time that it takes to conduct systematic literature reviews because it will reduce the amount of human effort required. So the small and tedious tasks like typing and copying and pasting, and checking format and things like that, a lot of those tasks can be done by AI. Obviously, on the flip side of that, it's important to focus on the human being who is carrying out the task. An unskilled person will not be able to produce a high quality SLR, even with access to the fastest and most comprehensive LLM on the market. There's certain critical thinking skills that one needs to distinguish between whether or not information is correct and incorrect. And that's actually one of the most valuable qualities. So certainly by using AI, it is possible to reduce the overall time that it takes to search for the literature manually. And it may, depending on how or what access to AI models one has, it may also reduce the cost. But the key task starts after that, which is then the human person who will go through and ensure that the data is actually suitable for its intended purpose. And because we know that LLMs cannot do that, that's something that one will always have to invest at least a certain amount of money in. I mean, unless obviously if someone has extremely deep pockets, that's not a problem. We can we can keep working until until clients can keep paying, but that's usually not a realistic scenario, especially in the current economic climate. So we want to try and keep the costs down, but we need to ensure that the individuals involved have the skills to distinguish between correct and incorrect information.
Excellent. All right, I believe we just have two more. Can AI tools improve consistency and reduce duplication across global regulatory submissions? For example, FDA and EU MDR.
This is definitely one of the most critical questions that a lot of both regulatory writers and manufacturers have. Because as we continue to globalize and expand into new global markets. It's obviously we encounter increasing amounts of regulation, and sometimes the requirements are similar but not the same. Sometimes the requirements are completely different, and it's very useful to be able to have tools that can deal with that kind of challenge. So, in previous answers, I have already mentioned that data management is a massive massive topic that companies and individuals will need to concern themselves with. I feel like if we use an analogy, I mean, I think we all remember, hopefully the attendees in this webinar, I understand that some of you may be a bit young, but I think that most of us will remember a time before email or before we had web browsers. So when we wanted to communicate with people, we had to use a pen and paper or a telephone, or we had to physically go to a specific location, like a library. And now that we have access to the internet, and it's a it's a 24/7, I mean, so virtually on the same status as a utility, the entire structure and workflow of how we do these tasks, as in communicating and looking for information, has changed drastically. And the same thing needs to happen in order for us to take advantage of AI. And I'm probably repeating myself, but the important fact or the important point to remember here is that a lot of the documents that we create in everyday life contain large amounts of information that is completely irrelevant to the AI model or to the large language model. There are certain key elements of data that we can identify and then present to an AI model and instruct it to use those items of data, which allows companies, manufacturers, regulatory writers to maintain control of the data and what data is being revealed to AI models. I think that, I mean, just to summarize, I think that yes, AI tools can definitely improve consistency and reduce duplication, but it's going to take a certain amount of internal effort from regulatory writing and manufacturing companies to structure the data in the way, in such a way that AI can come in and just use the data that it needs to create the documents that you need and customize them as appropriate, which may involve a certain amount of upfront investment in technology or in human capital. But it'll pay off down the line because changing and updating workflows to work in a more AI friendly way will allow the company to survive into the future as we see AI picking up speed and momentum.
Alrighty. Last but most certainly not least, how do AI-enabled vendors like Criterion Edge ensure quality control while accelerating the regulatory writing process?
So at Criterion Edge, I think we are very passionate about leveraging the strengths of AI, but we are also incredibly cautious when it comes to exposing our customers to the risk involved. So we have seen that generative AI is amazing at creating pieces of text fast, efficiently. It's honestly one of the things that reduces fatigue the most is the fact that one doesn't have to rely on your physical limits. So you don't have to sit and type for hours because we know that some of these documents can extend into the hundreds and thousands of words. The amount of effort that it used to take to type those documents was significant. And the ability to cut down on that effort and focus more on the mental and intellectual tasks as a regulatory writer is actually quite a bonus. I think that from the Criterion Edge perspective, we understand that the strength of having a hybrid system where AI supports human beings rather than going for an sort of an AI first strategy is that we do have the ability to develop human capital that is very competent to deal with AI and to meet the challenges that manufacturers and other companies place on us. Um, I think it's also important to mention that we may reach a stage where regulatory authorities themselves are going to start using AI to assess submissions, but I think that's a very distant future. I think that the regulatory authorities and the regulatory agencies and competent authorities are extremely skeptical. And as always, their job is to make sure that medical devices and drugs are safe and effective. And that does still require a high degree of human input. So being able to have the human insight into what the regulators are looking for at Criterion Edge and being able to leverage the strengths of AI to meet those requirements, I think is a huge benefit that we have, and we retain a lot of internal talent to do that. I think there are certain tasks that are things like checking punctuation or checking formatting that are really easy to hand over to an AI to perform reliably. But the higher level tasks still require a high degree of human intervention. And at the end of the day, our goal, as always, is to produce the highest quality documentation to ensure that manufacturers obtain the device and drug certification that they need to allow their products to reach the market to help. I mean, at the end of the day, it's people, it's us. It's us as members of society and the patients who benefit from that the most. So I think that quality control is one of those things that at the moment can only be done by attracting and retaining the kind of talent that sees those things as important, as that sees quality control and long-term relationships as important. So, and I think that AI is almost, again, sort of secondary in that respect, but not to talk it down, it's an amazing tool. Yeah. So we seem to have reached the end of the presentation. I feel like I could continue talking about AI forever. I hope that you've all enjoyed it, and I'll hand over to Justin to close off.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Paul, and thank you for everyone for tuning in. As mentioned, if you have additional questions, you are welcome to submit those using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom window. In addition, you can also reach out using the email consult@criterionedge.com that you can see in the bottom right of your screen. That we will also field questions to. And I'm also going to add in the chat a meeting link that you can use if you would like to connect with either Dr. Paula or anybody else on our team to further the discussions on AI or any projects that you might be currently working on. With that, I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your Wednesday, and we'll leave it at that.